Chapter 5 A Wanderer. Jesse Evans, again. Billy's appearance at 17 years of age. Billy and Jess volunteer in a fight against the Mescaleros. Bloody work. Slaughtering Indians with an axe. After leaving Chihuahua, Billy and Segura went to the Rio Grande, where they parted company, but only for a short time. Up to the month of December 1876, Billy's career was erratic, and it is impossible to follow his adventures consecutively. Many of them are, doubtless, lost to history. He fell in again with his old companion, Jesse Evans, and all that is known of Billy's exploits during the ensuing few months is gained by his own and Jesse's disconnected narrations. This youthful pair made themselves known in western Texas, northern and eastern Mexico, and along the Rio Grande in New Mexico by 100 deeds of daring crime. Young Jess had already won for himself the reputation of a brave but unscrupulous desperado, and in courage and skill with deadly weapons, he and Billy were fairly matched. They were, at this time, of nearly the same size. Jess was probably a year or two the oldest, whilst Billy was slightly the tallest, and a little heavier. Billy was 17 years of age in November 1876, and was nearly as large as at the day of his death. A light brown beard was beginning to show up on his lip and cheeks. His hair was of a darker brown, glossy, and luxuriant. His eyes were a deep blue, dotted with spots of a hazel hue, and were very bright, expressive, and intelligent. His face was oval in form, the most noticeable feature being two projecting upper front teeth, which knowing newspaper correspondents who never saw the man, nor the scenes of his adventures, describe as fangs which gave to his features an intensely cruel and murderous expression. Nothing can be further from the truth. That these teeth were a prominent feature in his countenance is true. That when he engaged in conversation or smiled they were noticeable is true. But they did not give to his always pleasing expression a cruel look, nor suggest either murder or treachery. All who ever knew Billy will testify that his polite, cordial, and gentlemanly bearing invited confidence and promised protection, the first of which he never betrayed, and the latter he was never known to withhold. Those who knew him best will tell you that in his most savage and dangerous moods his face always wore a smile. He ate and laughed, drank and laughed, rode and laughed, talked and laughed, fought and laughed, and killed and laughed. No loud and boisterous guffaw, but a pleasant smile, or a soft and musical ripple of the voice. Those who knew him watched his eyes for an exhibition of anger. Had his biographer stated that the expression of his eyes, to one who could read them, in angry mood was cruel and murderous, they would have shown a more perfect knowledge of the man. One could scarcely believe that those blazing, baleful orbs and that laughing face could be controlled by the same spirit. Billy was, at this time, about 5 feet 7 1/2 inches high, straight as a dart, weighed about 135 pounds, and was as light, active, and graceful as a panther. His form was well knit, compact, and wonderfully muscular. It was his delight, when he had a misunderstanding with one larger and more powerful than himself, but who feared him on account of his skill with weapons, to unbuckle his belt, drop his arms, and say, "Come on, old fella, I've got no advantage now. Let's fight it out, knuckles and skull." He usually won his fights. If he got the worst of it, he bore no malice. There were no bounds to his generosity. Friends, strangers, and even his enemies were welcome to his money, his horse, his clothes, or anything else of which he happened at the time to be possessed. The aged, the poor, the sick, the unfortunate, and helpless never appealed to Billy in vain for succor. There is an impression among some people that Billy was excessively gross, profane, and beastly in his habits, conversation, and demeanor. The opposite is the case. A majority of the utterly utter, curled darlings of society, might take example by Billy's courteous and gentlemanly demeanor, to their own great improvement and the relief of disgusted, sensible men. It would be strange, with Billy's particular surroundings, if he did not indulge in profanity. He did, but his oaths were expressed in the most elegant phraseology. And if purity of conversation were the test, hundreds of the prominent citizens of New Mexico would be taken for desperadoes sooner than young Bonnie. Billy was, when circumstances permitted, scrupulously neat and elegant in dress. Some newspaper correspondents have clothed him in fantastic Italian brigand or Mexican guerrilla style, with some hundreds of dollars worth of gold lace, etc., ornamenting his dress. But they did not so apparel him with his consent. His attire was usually of black, a black frock coat, dark pants and vest, a neat boot to his small shapely foot, and his only noticeable peculiarity in dress, usually, a Mexican sombrero. He wore this for convenience, not for show. They are very broad brimmed, protecting the face from the sun, wind, and dust, and very durable. They're expensive, but Billy never owned one which cost hundreds of dollars. They are worth in Chihuahua from $10 to $50. Some silly fellow with a surplus of money and paucity of brains may have loaded his hat with $1,000 worth of medals, gold lace, and thread, but Billy was not of those. Billy and Jess put in the few months they spent together by indulging in 100 lawless raids, sometimes committing depredations in Mexico and fleeing across the Rio Grande into Texas or New Mexico, and vice versa, until hundreds of ranchmen in both republics were on the lookout for them. And in many conflicts on either side of the river, they escaped capture and consequent certain death almost by miracle. There was no mountain so high, no precipice so steep, no torrent so fierce, no river so swift, no cave so deep, but these two would essay it in their daring rides for liberty. More than one bold pursuer bit the dust in these encounters, and a price was offered for the bodies of the outlaws, dead or alive. The Mescalero Apache Indians from the Fort Stanton, New Mexico reservation used to make frequent raids into Old Mexico and often attacked immigrants along the Rio Grande. On one occasion, a party from Texas, consisting of 3 men and their families, on their way to Arizona, came across Billy and Jess in the vicinity of the Rio Miembres. They took dinner together, and the Texans volunteered much advice to the two unsophisticated boys, representing the danger they braved by traveling unprotected through an Indian country, and proposing that they should pursue their journey in company. They represented themselves as old and experienced Indian fighters who had, in Texas, scored their hundreds of dead Comanches. The boys declined awaiting the slow motion of ox wagons, and after dinner rode on. About the middle of the afternoon, the boys discovered a band of Indians moving along the foothills on the south in an easterly direction. They speculated on the chances of their new friends, the immigrants, falling in with these Indians, until from signs of a horse's footprints they became convinced that an Indian messenger had preceded them from the east, and putting that and that together, it was evident to them that the band of Indians they had seen were bent on no other mission than to attack the immigrants. With one impulse, the young knights wheeled their horses and struck across the prairie to the foothills to try and cut the Indian trail. This they succeeded in doing, and found that the party consisted of 14 warriors, who were directing their course so as to surely intercept the immigrants, or strike them in camp. The wary horses caught the spirit of their brave riders, and over rocks and hills, through canyons and tulle brake the steady, measured thud of their hoofs alone broke the silence. "Can we make it, Billy?" queried Jess. "Will our horses hold out?" "The question isn't will we, but how soon," replied Billy. "It's a groundhog case. We've got to get there. Think of those white-headed young ones, Jess, and whoop up. When my horse's forelegs let up, I've got 2 of my own." Just at dusk, the brave boys rounded a point in the road and came in full view of the immigrants' camp. In time. Just in time. At this very moment, the terrible yell of the Apache broke upon their ears, and the savage band charged the camp from a pass on the south. The gallant horses, which had carried the boys so bravely, were reeling in their tracks. Throwing themselves out of the saddles, the young heroes grasped their Winchesters, and on a run, with a yell as blood-curdling as any red devil of them all could utter, they threw themselves amongst the yelling fiends. There was astonishment and terror in the tone which answered the boys' war cry, and the confusion amongst the Reds increased as one after another of their number went down under the unerring aim of the two rifles. Jess had stumbled and fallen into a narrow arroyo, overgrown with tall grass and weeds. Raising himself to his knees, he found that his fall was a streak of great good luck. As he afterwards remarked, he could not have made a better entrenchment if he had worked a week. Calling Billy, he plied his Winchester rapidly. When Billy saw the favorable position Jess had involuntarily fallen into, he bounded into it. But just as he dropped to his knees, a ball from an Indian rifle shattered the stock of his Winchester, and the broken wood inflicted a painful wound on Billy's hand. His gun useless, he fought with his six-shooter, fuming and cursing his luck. The boys could not see what was going on in the camp, as a wagon intervened. But soon Billy heard the scream of a child as if in death agony, and the simultaneous shriek of a woman. Leaping from his entrenchment, he called to Jess to stay there and cover his attack, whilst he sprang away, pistol in one hand and a small Spanish dagger in the other, directly towards the camp. At this moment the Indians essayed to drive them from their defense. Billy met them more than halfway and fought his way through a half-dozen of them. He had emptied his revolver and had no time to load it. Clubbing his pistol, he rushed on, and dodging a blow from a burly Indian, he darted under a wagon and fell on a prairie axe. Billy afterwards said he believed that his howl of delight frightened those Indians so that he and Jess won the fight. He emerged on the other side of the wagon. A glance showed him the three men and all the women and children but one woman and one little girl ensconced behind the other two wagons and partly protected by a jutting rock. One woman and the little girl were lying apparently lifeless on the ground. With yell on yell, Billy fell among the Reds with his axe. He never missed hearing every crack of Jess's rifle, and in 3 minutes there was not a live Indian in sight. 8 good ones slept their last sleep. Billy's face, hands, and clothing, the wagons, the camp furniture, and the grass, were bespattered with blood and brains. Turning to the campers, the boys discovered that the little girl had received a fracture of the skull in an attempt by an Indian brave to brain her, and the mother had fainted. All 3 of the men were wounded. One was shot through the abdomen and in the shoulder. It is doubtful if he survived. The other 2 were but slightly hurt. Billy had the heel of his boot battered, his gun shot to pieces, and received a wound in the hand. Jess lost his hat. He said he knew when it was shot off his head, but where it went to, he could not surmise.